Welcome to Wednesday night at NETIV. I just want to tell you that we're kind of complete, I hope, tonight, the final part to the 2025. And so that is where we're going to start, is in that particular place. Um, I've Last week I spent a great deal of time sharing with you a couple secrets hidden in the story of Joseph and Pharaoh's dreams. Joseph and his interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams. My point was that the story hints at maquettes at the end of days, and I believe well, I believe I have some more wild clues that are hidden in the story that will go on to help explain where I believe we're at in time. So let's look at the first word in our particular section of maquettes. Maquettes begins in Genesis chapter. Well, let me get to the beginning. Chapter 40, and we're looking at the very first word in it, and it happened. Now, I want to say that really the first word is vaihi, and vaihi has a strong countenance to it, and if you wanted to literally talk about it, it could talk about it, and it was at the end. So Genesis 41:1 hints at the end. Now, in the Midrash and Zohar, vaihi often hints of pain or trouble before redemption. Now, the gematria of Vihi is 36, and we know 36 is the number associated with the Lamed Vav Zadakim, or the 36 hidden righteous people who sustain our world that we live in. 36 is also the number for that which is hidden. So as we go through this, then I want to spend some time talking a little bit about all that's going on in terms of the end of days. So hang on. I'm getting myself tuned in here. All right. I see this Vaihi as the first clue that through hidden suffering comes the revelation of a hidden Zadakim who's going to help bring redemption to the end of the age. Now, the year 2025 might mark a time when the hidden righteous ones are actually going to be completing their task as they understand it and have left us at the door of freedom, or at the door of the world to come, or the age to come. And why we are looking at Pharaoh's dreams, and it's not a single dream. Is there a point here that there's a double cycle of dreams? We understand that Pharaoh's dreamt about 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows, and later he dreamt about 7 healthy ears of grain and 7 scorched ears of grain. In chapter 41, verse 32, Joseph tells Pharaoh, and concerning the repetition of the dream to Pharaoh twice, and that's the key, twice, that is because the matter is ready to emanate from God, and God is hastening to execute it. Now, in Jewish thought, the doubling of a prophecy speaks of certainty. It also talks about acceleration. So maybe 2025 is hinted at here as being a doubling year, where divine decrees that have been dreamlike or hidden begin to manifest themselves more rapidly. So it seems interesting to me that Joseph rises from a prison or a place of darkness to become the ruler of Egypt, and thereby bringing light and order. Now, in Kabbalah, on the tree of life, Yosef represents Yesod. Again, here's the tree of life. This is Yesod, which is the foundation of everything. Joseph was the foundation of what was about to happen. Now, as we go through this, then, the channel that connects heaven and earth is this middle channel, heaven being the top, and the bottom being the earth, which is the Malkut, which means kingdom. That's the bottom. So Joseph reveals what's stored and prepared for the end of days at this point in time. So if 2025 is hinted at as Ketz, then we are in the time when things hidden from millennia could suddenly burst into something open. Now, this could be an aha year. After all, the numbers themselves, 2025, as I explained last week, is also can be read as 45 squared, or 45 times 45, which could be pointing to not the president of the United States, number 45, but to Adam, because Adam's name is a gematria wise is equal to the number 45. Now, at this point, I'm speculating. Of course, I probably have been speculating all along, but let me do it this way. I am at the point of speculating, is humanity being elevated at this time? Are we seeing a change? Is this the point of tikkun, the point where the repair of Adam and his fall is beginning to take shape? Are we close to connecting to Mashiach, who is also called in Kabbalah Adam, because he repairs the broken Adam? Now, what's the square of Adam? A perfected humanity? This seems to suggest that Maketz is whispering that 2025 could mark an important phase of human rectification. Will we see a greater shift from what is called galut, or exile, move towards a higher or more obvious spiritual world? Are we going to draw closer? Now, I believe the hidden key in Maketz is the story of the brothers. At the end of this parsha, Joseph's brothers unknowingly begin doing what we call teshuvah, repenting because they sold Joseph so many years before. And throughout their meeting, they don't recognize him the first time, but the feeling of guilt and regret seems to be palatable in their reading of the text. Now, I think the idea here is that before the end can come, there must be recognition of a hidden guilt and a sincere desire to return or to repent. Now, maybe 2025 hints at a collective teshuvah, a collective return, which might be speaking of a personal return or a national return for sure, and even a global change that's going on. Things appear to be becoming more and more obvious that evil is lurking, but there seems to be more and more positive changes that are showing up also. Now, I want to talk about the secrets for a minute, and I want to talk about their mystical qualities. In fact, the word count speaks of what's called akrit ha yamim, which is the end of days. Now, the opening words of Miketz, remember, is it was at the end of 2 full years. Now I want to stress the idea of 2 full years. Midrash and Zohar both point out that 2 years can allude to not just 2 physical years, but 2 millennia, or 2 major epochs. Yamim, days, is often coded for years or eras in public or in prophetic language. Yom Ehad is an era, in other words, and some commentaries hint that Miketz simply alludes to the end after the long period of hidden exile. In this model, 2025 could symbolically represent a Miketz, the closing of an age after some 2,000 years of hiddenness, of exile, and particularly post-temple destruction. Now, I think of Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh's dreams of 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows and 7 ears and 7 thin ears. Joseph explains they are speaking of 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Now, in the Zohar, the Arizal, when he interprets it, was writing, the idea of 7 and 7 reflects what we call cosmic cycles, Shemitah cycles, or 7 times 7, which is actually a jubilee, and even worlds or epochs of time. Now, some Kabbalists teach us we are nearing the end of a larger cycle of famine, a spiritual famine. We read in Amos 8:11, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord God, and I will send famine into the land. Not a famine of bread, not a famine or of thirst or water, but to hear the word of the Lord. There has been a period of time when it appears as though the world is losing track of God and his word. Are we finally reaching the end of that time? In Israel, the number of people who are now studying and learning Torah has increased since October 7th. Now, could 2025 align with the end of 7 years of spiritual famine? In Israel, since the October 6th massacre, again, people are pivoting towards spiritual abundance. Now, next, Joseph plays a role of metaphoric characterization. He's the character that we might call, well, what might we call him? He is the Mashiach ben Yosef. Yosef descends into a dungeon and then suddenly ascends to greatness. The suddenness with which speaks of that they rushed him out of the pit, which is in 44:14, which hints to the sudden revelation of Mashiach ben Yosef at the end. The Zohar and Midrashim and later teachings by such great rabbis as the Ramchal and the Vilna Gaon describe Mashiach ben Yosef being hidden, suffering, then revealed at an end point, an end of time. So Maketz hints that that Joseph, or a Joseph-like figure, would be called the Mashiach ben Yosef, or at least have that same kind of influence in his day that this one will have in ours. It emerges rapidly after a long concealment, possibly aligning with the critical window of 2025. This could be the rising of that event. And what about the idea of a gematria for Maketz? You see, Maketz has a value of 230. It could be a hidden pathway between judgment, din, and mercy, Rahim. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There are only 3 letters in the word Maketz. The word begins with a mem, then a kuf, and finally a sadi. Now, the mem has a value of 40, but it speaks of water or flow and is oftentimes associated with understanding. Now, the source of Rakamim is found in Binah, again, understanding. In fact, it's referred to as the mother, from whom Rakamim flows down into what we call Tiferet, or the balance that goes on. So we're going from here down the pipeline to Tiferet. Now, Kuf has a value of 100. Now, it speaks about, or often speaks, can be associated with klipot, or shells, something that conceals, and it's always at a lower place. Also, the only letter that descends below the line is kuf, suggesting some sort of a fall or a harsh judgment or a din. The final letter is a sadi, which has a value of 90. Now, again, it speaks of the Zadok, just one often considered the most, or the one who connects Yesod, foundation, with Malkut. Righteousness, balance, and one who brings tikkun, or rectification, from the judgment. Now, when you put the 3 letters together, Mem, Kuf, and Yad Sadi, you end up creating a symbol which is called Raham, which is what we would call today a divine womb. Again, ties back to Binah, understanding. From Rakam, we also get to the word compassion. In fact, it's actually can be put into plural, Rakamim. By extension, the word, the world, the womb is cherishing a fetus, and the womb speaks of a descent into concealment and harsh judgment, which is kuf. And there's elevation and redemption through righteousness, sadi. Now, this may correspond to the process of transforming harsh din, judgment, into sweetened rakamim through the middle pillar, through this center up and down. Now, as we go through this, we also can look at it from another point of view. 230, the value of the word. It's a composite of paths, 230, because it can also speak to 32 paths, which are the paths of letters and the paths of the 10 Sephirot that are a combination of the two. Kabbalists interpret each path as a channel between two Sephirot. Kuf connects to Klipa, or the danger of din when unmarked or unbalanced. Sadi is the Sadi that stands at the base of a central pillar. Again, upholding balance. Mem is about Bina, it's about understanding, from which we get the idea of Rakmim, which is the idea of flow. The 230 may encode a hidden journey between Bina, understanding, and Malkut, its manifestations. A cycle where judgment is allowed but ultimately transformed into mercy and clarity via a Zadik. 230 as a spiritual mechanism within the tree of life. And again, this organism here is called the tree of life. Again, the idea is the fact it's a source of mercy, it's the raw judgment, it's about balancing, and it's about transitions. So the value of the word for judgment in this particular case would be 230, which, because of Ketz, which means, or which I attempted to show as a concept of din and the other. Continue. I lost my place. Okay, here we go. Now there's another significant book, which, like the Zohar, which I have, is called the Habahir, which is the book of clarity, or a book of illumination, if you will. An ancient mystical book or text in which it talks about Maketz that is not known even to the angels. So the end of days is not even known to the angels, but it's hinted at through cycles that are found in differences of light and darkness, and cycles of famine and plenty, or in concealment and revelation. So the Bahir then deals with this idea of expanding and growing closer to God. Maketz, with its dream interpretation and sudden changes of fortune, mirrors this exact dynamic. And 2025 could be a marker that hints at the window of cosmic flipping from concealment to revealing. One of the scientific ways of looking at this is what's going on in space right now. First off, Voyager, which was sent up almost 41 years ago, is still transmitting and sending back information, which is hinting at something other than what was expected. We know when we look out into space using the new telescopes, we find that we can go further and further. Now, if you add to that the understanding of AI and Wilbur, which was Google's understanding of AI, Google's AI believes that we are tapping into another universe, that this is not the only universe that exists. God has more. So we're beginning to see revealment of something that has been hidden for generations and years. I want to take a moment and try to tie the Haftorah of Miketz into this whole story. Now, the Haftorah comes from the book of First Kings. It's the story of Solomon. You see, Solomon doesn't necessarily have a dream, but God speaks to him and asks him what he desires. And when it's all done, he desires to understand. Now, the same thing happens with Joseph, who's the viceroy of Egypt. Now, he's not going to become king, but at the same point in time, he holds the second highest position. And both refer to the fact that they are going to have immense power. And not only with that power, both of them have immense wisdom. And through dreams, Joseph reaches his pinnacle, and through thought, Solomon also. Now, the Haftorah opens with the words, "It was all a dream." Now, in the case of Kings, this line refers to the scene which immediately precedes it, in which God offers to grant any wish that Solomon asks for. So he chooses discernment. In the case of Joseph, he has demonstrated the ability to discern from his teenage years. Discernment is a key factor in both stories. Now, before I go farther, I want to at first pull a couple verses from Miketz with, well, a direct redemption hint in it for us. Now, then I'll show you another wild code that's hidden within this story. Now, the first hint comes in Genesis 41:14, and it says, "Then Pharaoh sent and summoned Joseph, and they rushed him from the pit. They shaved him, they changed his clothes, and he came to Pharaoh. Joseph goes instantly from the pit, which we would call metaphorically despair, to the palace or to glory. And notice that they rushed him, which speaks of how redemption in the end will happen suddenly and unexpectedly. Now, just like Geulah, which means liberation, is described in the prophets, it simply here comes true. Now, notice that they have to shave him and change his clothes, which speaks of a total identity transformation. We might see it as a exile identity change. His old is stripped away, and the true royal identity is revealed. And I believe the true role of Israel and humanity is presently hidden under prison clothes, and has been for centuries. But we will be revealed soon, and revealed quickly. Now, the second hint that I find in the scriptures happens in 41:30, where it says, 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the people will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will destroy the land. Now, 7 years of famine could speak of a 7-year period of global hardship before ultimate redemption. In fact, the book of Sanhedrin calls for the 7 years prior to the end to be a 7-year period. Now, the idea of forgotten abundance, well, the feeling is as if all received blessings were simply erased. And it begins to make sense that we're in a period of testing our imuna, our faith. Could the secret here be that just before the final revealing of Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef, and his energy, whatever that means, there's an intense hardship, but it's the final stage before healing and abundance. Now, I started this whole thing by talking about the fact that this parsha has the note reminding us at the bottom that there's 22,025 words. Well, Maketz has a weird structural feature in that it's made of 2 main dreams, Pharaoh's 2 dreams, and 2 encounters between Joseph and his brothers. In Joseph's first encounter with his brothers, They just don't recognize him. Then the second encounter, where they were forced to bring with them Benjamin, and repentance soon followed. Maquettes has a weird structural feature in that it's made up of two main dreams. Two dreams by Pharaoh, followed by 2 times 2 encounters with the brothers. Now, Joseph's brothers' first encounter, Joseph, who remains unknown to them, and then second encounter, they came with Benjamin, and they brought with them 2 cycles of redemption. Now, the Kabbalists will tell you that mathematically, what we have here is 2 plus 2 plus 2, or 6, which is the letter Vav in Hebrew, which represents a connection, a redemption in Kabbalah. In the Sefer Yetzirah, the other book I oftentimes find myself using, in the Sefer Yetzirah, Vav connects heaven and earth. It's the hook. Now, the entire Parsha is coded around the energy of collection, recognition, and lifting out of exile. Again, hinting that 2025, the word count, is about the connection between the hidden divine plans and their manifestation here on earth. Now, here's some Zohar for you, found in, again, the Parsha dealing with maquettes. So we're talking about the end of days, themes, and quietly talking about that which is hidden, the time of redemption. Now, the first one comes in Maquettes 28b, where we read, "At the end of the darkness, light will arise suddenly, just as Joseph arose from the pit in a single hour." The commentary teaches that Joseph symbolized the hidden Zadok, the righteous one, concealed during times of darkness. Redemption comes not gradually, but all of a sudden, like Yosef rushing out of the dungeon. Maquettes at the end is a code word for the end of the darkness of exile. Now, I believe that 2025 ties in this idea of suddenness and Joseph's ascent, mirroring an even long dark period, just like what we are in now. And the light is higher consciousness, gula energy, liberated energy, which burst forth suddenly, possibly around the critical Maquette's moment. That's hinted by 2025. Now, the second Zohar section is in Vayeshev 187b, which is the Parsha just before Maquettes. It begins by saying, "There is an awakening from below that stirs an awakening from above. In the end, the hidden Zadok will be revealed through dreams." So that Joseph, if he's Mashiach ben Joseph, will be revealed through a dream in the beginning. There will be a prophet who will recognize him first. Now, the explanation holds that dreams are not just personal. They're actually a collective. They're actually signaling a global spiritual movement. Joseph's dreams interpretation in Maquettes hints that properly understanding visions leads to redemption. And again, could this tie to 2025? Now, many people are reporting strange collective dreams, spiritual awakenings, sudden changes, a change that there is an awakening from below. Something's going on here on earth. It's teshuvah, it's yearning, it's about searching, which is believed to be the stirring of the cosmic awakening from above. So, in other words, all of the things that are going on this earth, all the things that are based on righteousness, are coming from this earth, are actually stirring actions and activities in heaven. Now, there's another one. Again, it's found in Maquettes. It's 198b. And this time it says, "At the time of the end, hidden matters will be made known through the righteous one who has kept his faith even in prison. Now, commentators will explain that Joseph in prison represents imuna. It represents faith in the midst of darkness. Redemption isn't just political. It's about revealing of a hidden divine truth. And at times or at the end, the secrets will be, they'll be poured out just like rivers. And with all the speculation regarding 2025, will there be a massive increase in what's called esoteric knowledge, hidden knowledge, knowledge that's ancient in many ways, and it will begin to go forth. Now, it wasn't until basically the late 90s, last century, that the Torah became very popular among the Gentiles. In fact, Art Scroll originally made their books to help the Jew that has lost track of his beliefs and his religion. But more people that were Gentiles began to read it. And there was also building at that very same time, there was this understanding of a deeper reality. And so many people began to read and study, not just simply the plain word, but they sought to go deeper into it. They began to look into the levels that are hidden. Now, for one more thing, in the Zohar, in the word maketz itself, hints at ketz hayamim, which again is the end of days, which is a very phrase Daniel in the book of Daniel uses when talking about the final redemption. So is maketz or parsha maketz prophetically coding what's the end? Hard to tell. Now, in Kabbalah, every letter is seen not just as a letter, but it's also a living spiritual form with an inner meaning and energy. And when you look at the letters of maketz, they actually tell you a story or a process of redemption, if you will. Let's look at again. Mem. Now, I talked about flow and water, but this time I want to talk about the fact that mem can be written two different ways. One where it is completely sealed, which is called the final form. And then the second one is called the closed form, which means that there is a opening at the bottom. So it's really semi-closed, but it speaks of the womb, a way in which something will emerge. We do talk about water, but mem represents hiddenness. It represents gestation. It represents things not yet revealed. It corresponds to the time of exile when the divine truth is hidden beneath layers of physicality. In maketz, we start with mem. And again, we are inside the womb of an exile right now that will soon be over. Now, kuf is a form, is a line descending below the line, and it falls under the baseline or a place lower than any other letter. But kuf also means holiness, and it also means that which is fallen, klipa, impurity. Kuf represents the descent into deep darkness, even into the realm where impurity seems to rule, kind of like where we're at now. Now, in our history, Kuf represents the spiritual descent of humanity and the foot or the long line falling below into impurity. But in maketz, after hiddenness, after mem, there's an even deeper fall, and the exile seems to get worse before it gets better. Now, the sadi, the final letter, is a standing tall, and it's firm, almost like a righteous figure crowned, meaning that tzaddik is about righteousness. It's about standing firm at the end of days. The zadi, again, is, well, what am I going to say? It's the idea of final step. It's the final arising that's going to happen at the end of days. Now, the sixth hint that's found in this is the idea of the sod, the secret of the letters. You see, again, we can read the letters as a literal letter, but we can also find that which is below it. Again, we have to count on the Kabbalists to help us find the answers to those kinds of things. So in Kabbalah, every Hebrew letter is seen not just as a letter, but as a living spiritual form with inner meaning and energy. And when you see, or when you look at the letters of Maketz, they actually tell you a story, the process of redemption itself. Mem, that closed box or the semi-closed box, the womb, again talks about concealment, but the concealment is going to be revealed. Something will come forth from it. And it corresponds to, again, while it's open, but yet nothing's happening, it's called exile. But then there's divine truth that is hidden deep within it. And as it begins to mature and comes alive, it comes out, the womb becomes the place of the exile, how we leave where we were at. And again, in the case of our story, we're talking about Kuf, which represents the descent into deep darkness. It's in our history. Kuf represents the spiritual descent of humans. Again, Maketz, after hiddenness, there will be an even deeper fall, followed by a greater awakening, a rising up. That's what's coming from it. And again, the Sadi, again, speaks to the idea of standing firm and standing tall. Now, the Midrash, there's a section called Bereshit Rabbah 89, 89:1. And it sees something strange in the text. When Joseph stands before Pharaoh in Bereshit 41:46, it says, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh the king. Okay, so what's strange about that? Well, nothing on the surface. It's actually all it is just his age. But why does he put the age of Joseph here? Why does he need to tell us about that? Well, the Midrash explains that that Yosef's 30 years hints at another principle, or a cosmic principle, if you will. There's a time of hidden suffering. That's the prison or the exile that lasts for a preordained period. There is an end to this cycle. And then at a certain point, what they call the mature moment, the hidden light bursts forward. Now, the number 30 is not just a random number, it's the age of the beginning of a Levitical priest's function. Priests do not start work until they're 30 years of age. They also hold that the age is full, at that 30, a person is at full spiritual maturity. And if you think sod, you understand 30 is a combination of the word lamed, and in gematria, which speaks of learning, it's referred to as the Hebrew word for lamud, which means accumulated inner growth. So the hidden secret is that Joseph becomes king after 30 years, because that's when the inner learning is complete. And the light that was trapped in the prison of Galut is finally manifest. Okay, the question now is in, how does this tie this to what is now? Now, several Kabbalists explain that the last phrase or last phase of history before Mashiach arrives would follow a Joseph-like pattern. There would be a long hidden period of growth. There would be a period seen as being harsh, humiliating, imprisonment. And then at a prefixed mature time, there'd be a sudden revelation. Some even hinted that the modern scholar or the modern exile, the intense spiritual darkness or post-Holocaust experience would last for about 70 to 80 years. Now, this comes from a character called the Vilna Gaon. But the final intense suffering phase would last about 30 years before the redemption. Okay. Can you feel I'm getting close to something? Many modern Kabbalists hint that this beginning would occur in about somewhere between 1995 and 2025. That's the 30-year period. Well, we're at the end of that 30-year period. Could this be the 30 years we're now finishing, be the time when Joseph leaves the prison and he becomes part of the palace? Now, if this is so, we might now know, or we might rightly know, that we're in the midst of a very great transition. Joseph's lived through and about to step away from prison clothes into royal garments. But let's go even deeper. The phrase stood before Pharaoh. Now, in Gematria, it's connected to the concept of tikkun. Tikkun is about return, it's about repentance. Adam's rectification of mankind will occur as he stood before Pharaoh. Pharaoh metaphorically speaks of all the oppressive systems that keep the soul enslaved. So when Joseph, the hidden soul, stands upright before Pharaoh, systematic darkness disappears at 30. And it means that the time when truth can no longer be hidden and the world must begin to shift. But there is something even wilder to show. A gematria bombshell, if you will. Let's calculate the gematria. We know Maketz is actually 190. There's another word that comes from that, and it's called shanatim, which speaks of two periods, because we talked about the fact that we aren't talking about the two periods of feast and famine. We're also talking about the brothers twice. And there's also another section, which is called yamim, which is the word for days. And that, again, so shatanim equals 790. Yamim equals 100. Now, if I added 190, 790, and 100, we get 1080, which is, again, nothing that we would understand normally, but it's an ultra deep number in Kabbalah. In the Sefer Yetzirah, 180 or 1080 is connected to the fullness of the divine name that is expanded. Now, the divine name is Havayah, or the four-letter name. But if you include all of the value of all the letters in the four letters that make up his name, expanding those letters to make it into a whole word, you eventually come up with the idea of a divine name. So this divine name is the completion of a cycle. It's the final tikkun. Now, 1080 is also 36 times 30. 36 is the idea of the righteous. 30, again, is the age at which Joseph was. So do you remember from our study, it's also 36, and it speaks of time of Hanukkah and the lighting of the candles. 36 is the number of Lamed Vav Zadakim, the hidden righteous who sustained the world. And 30 is about maturity, as we saw with Joseph's age. So Maketz Shatanim Yamim literally encodes through the hidden righteous ones, the 36, achieving full spiritual maturity, 30, the final light of redemption, the days of light, will shine at the end. Okay, as I just mentioned, there's two periods in Shatanim. And again, what could the two periods be? According to the Kabbalists, it's the first exile from the destruction of the first temple and the second exile, which we're still in after the destruction of the second temple. Maketz hints at both. which leads us to a third stage, the days of Yamim, or the days of eternal light, the final redemption. We're not just ending one cycle, we are ending all cycles of darkness, and we're doing them all at once. Okay, one more thing. Several years ago, I used to listen to, and I still do, Rabbi Pinchas Winston. Now, he began to teach long before I found any other ones, prophetic understandings. Well, he pointed out that it was a common thought among the Kabbalists that we have 6,000 years as a society before the end comes. But he also notes that that time had been shortened by 210 years. Why? Because that was the time that Israel served in their exile in Egypt. So if it's 210 years short of that, then what is it that we're at? Well, we're in the year 5785, which means we actually only have 5 years left. Okay, if I've shortened this teaching a bit, but I think you get the possible meaning of 2025. May the Mashiach come, may he come in our day, and may he come quickly. That's all I have to share tonight. I hope it was something that helped you and made you feel good about the fact that we're getting close to good Lord coming for us. Anybody